Okay, happy Father's Day 2020. I thought I'd do a scene, just in the spirit of Father's Day, thinking about my dad. We'll base it around this. Fisherman here, and I'm going to set a foundation for this scene on a half-page glossy cardstock, 8.5 by 5.5 inch format, done in a portrait format, you know, elongated, tall. And let's see if we can get something, kind of the foundation of this, stamped fairly quickly. And I'll approach this scene. I'm going for a couple things that are fairly specific, but we'll see if we can get the layout, the basic layout, established fairly quickly here. All right, now I'm going to try this technique here. A lot of you have done it before, probably. You know, I've gotten some feedback on this brayering. I never thought about to do it before, but I'm a really slow learner, so I'm just going to use this brayer on my card. I'm picking it a little bit up, you know, from the over-inking on the sides there, but always over-ink rather than under-ink, okay? Make sure that you get a good brayering of that, and we'll get that center area right there. You notice how I didn't ink up these side areas right there because I know I was just going to go for that center portion like that, but the brayering works pretty good. You just have to use so very little pressure, and that's one of the benefits of that. I got a little bit, you know, the brayering does squeeze down on the rubber a little bit, and there is a little bit of movement. So there is a slight tinge of a blur to that image. You know, I'm not really good at that brayering. I've only done it, you know, like a couple times before in a test video just recently. So pretty new to me. I think I should have used a little bit of a shorter stroke like this, maybe, or a lighter pressure, you know, just so it doesn't bunch up a little bit. Okay, let's see. I'm going to use one of my island stamps right here. This block is a little bit too long. Only ever so slightly. Okay, so there's my island image, and I'm going to put that right on the horizon out here, okay? And we'll also just do that in black. Okay, and I'll put it, let me see, I'm referencing this photo on my computer. Someone asked me if I can, not really stamp it out, but they just gave it to me as an idea. I'm going to do some aspects of that photograph on here. Oops, I over-inked a little bit up there with that. That happens. And let's see, let me go for another impression back here. I was thinking about using a different island, but I can just use the same one. I'm going to be putting a lot of trees up on top of this island anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, let's see. Okay. Something like that. So this nice little foundation. I can even put another one coming in here from the side if I want to. Let's do that just for a little bit of variation. Okay. One of the good things about rubber stamping is the repetition of imagery, or the potential repetition of imagery, without things kind of looking awkward, like, you know, having the exact same thing repeated over and over again. That's why I kind of always balance off my images, hopefully to where it's not really apparent, you know, if you use the same image over and over again. It doesn't look so kind of repetitious and obvious that some stamp is the same one stamped in multiple times. I do this thing with my balancing of my imagery on the designs in terms of how I weight the formations on there. Okay, this is Tiny Rocks. And I'm stamping this in brown. The color scheme of this piece is going to be in brown. Brown warm tones. Okay. Alright. I'm doing it in brown. Okay. So you can do your different imagery in the color scheme that you're using. So I have a antique linen and a walnut stain like this. Alright. So when you're doing your imagery, like, you know, that background outline could have been in black in the foreground and brown in the background. If you wanted to create a little bit of space, I don't know, maybe that would have been cool. I didn't really think about it at the time, though, but, you know, that's always a possibility. Okay, this is the Tiny Rocks done in brown here. It'll look kind of strange, you know, having these multicolored rocks down here. And it doesn't really make sense until you bring in your lighting into the scene in the form of layered images, or not layered images, layered coatings of ink in those same colors, okay? Okay, let's see. Let's go with the cloud space here. Let's go with the, okay, I was trying to think of whether I want to go with a brown or a dark brown. I was thinking the brown might be a little bit too light, but maybe the dark brown's a little bit too dark. So, one of the things about stamping was we're just making impressions, right? So, now if I color this in with dark brown, it's not going to be a solid dark brown like this because the image is tonal. So this is black, but it looks gray. But even so, I mean, one of the things you can always do, rubber stamps, just depending on how much ink is on there, you know, is the value degree, whatever, of how dark something will stamp out. So if there's a drier version of that same ink on this image, it's going to stamp out lighter just because there's not as much ink. Okay, so I did a little bit of both, you know. Even though I don't know if I really needed to, but just wiping off some of that brown around some of these forms in here, it should transition them off a little bit lighter. So you get a varied impression, okay? So it's not, you know, this monotone value going across there. So I don't know if you can see that, but there's just lighter versions of it. Like I said, it's inherently lighter in the design itself too, but you can see some areas really fade out, and that's where I've kind of wiped it off. So you get this varied cloud formation up there. And that's, you know, that's a good thing in terms of just visual variety when it comes to your pieces. Okay. All right, cloud space. You know, it's this cloud that can be used in various ways like that, and you can overlap. You can do it in multiple tones as well. I can do it in here. I've got the dark brown in here, and let's go with the light brown like this. Okay. Now it's going to have some dark brown on there, so it's not going to be just a pure version of that lighter brown, but see that little variation up there? Alright, so this is our foundation right there, and it's ready to go. Alright, anyway, let's see, we're going to layer this with various tones here. Let me show you how you kind of choose, or you can choose, you know, some of the color schemes that you're working in. Okay, and I have some distress, brownish tones here. I want this to be a real kind of warmer sunset type of color scheme, but it's going to be done in more of the kind of the yellows transitioning into brown tones and whatnot. I do want it to warm up quite a bit though, so I'm going to throw this. This is a brilliant yellow. You can just throw kind of a neutral yellow in there if you want to. Or you can go with, you know, there's a lot of other distress colors that you can kind of add in here. What I'm doing right here is I'll kind of line them up in what I think is something going from light colors to dark. Okay, so it's light, a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker. Here's the brown that I've used. Always use the colors that you've stamped your imagery out in the toning process. That way it'll kind of merge everything in. So it kind of goes like this, right here, okay? And you can see this is mixing and matching. If I don't have certain colors in pad form, you know, if you have some pens like this, you know, you can always add these into the mix, all right? So definitely mix and match. I mean, this is kind of a dye-based, or it is a dye-based process right here, but a lot of you have Copic markers and things like that. What you do is if you've used alcohol inks on here, add whatever dye-based inks you have first down here, and then go back in and, you know, do some additional coloring with alcohol pens. Okay? All right. You know, before I get into this too, okay, as I'm blabbing away here. One of the things that I wanted to do too, I saw this on the Facebook group. Someone used these islands and some trees in a way that I like really, you know, very much. And what she's done is she's taken some trees, kind of more silhouette-based trees like this, okay, and she's just planted them right on top of these islands. These islands look a little bit distant to me, but when you put this tree down as a reference, it brings it up much closer, and it's saying, well, this is, you know, just, you know, a much closer island, you know, than if you just use the, you know, tips of it like that or something like that. But I'll use them fairly large and make a little bit more of a kind of a visual impact, you know, statement with these trees. So, visual impact meaning I'm just using a larger portion of them. Okay, so I don't know. I guess I could have those trunks down there, but I really don't want the trunks. I want it to be kind of, you know, more of the larger tops here of the tree, okay? This is a spruce tree. This is the small version, 077C. Okay, I'll go for, yeah, let's see, let's go right with that and come over here. Maybe I'll get a little bit of the trunk showing. Yeah, I really do like that look. Yeah, a couple people have done things like this with these trees before. Okay, let's go for a little bit of a change. I'm using a larger and smaller portion of it, just kind of, you know, changing the height of it and the amount of it that I use in here. All right, yeah, for some variation too, I have these smaller ones, the Tree Duo stamp. This stamp is really, really old, and it's because I can tell because it's a hand-indexed piece of wood. It's not a sticker, which I switched over to fairly early in, you know, the Stampscapes history. One night I was doing all this hand indexing on my of the stamps, you know, so that it would be dry enough for the next day. When I had people coming in to help out with, you know, mounting of the rubber and whatnot. And my tip of one of my fingers went numb, and I thought, oh, carpal tunnel, you know. I was just putting so much pressure against this wrist right here. Okay, so anyways, there's that kind of island, and I mean, you can vary it change it around however you want, you know, because of the variation on, you know, what you do with these trees. Or you can do it with, you know, any kind of tree, really. Alright, actually, let me go a little bit more out here in the distance. But yeah, this is a really old stamp. When I felt my fingertip go numb, I was like, okay, that's it with the hand index, and I just got right on to the formatting of the different images for labels. And if you're new to stamping, since all stamps used to be pretty much wood-mounted stamps, there wasn't unmounted stamps and cling foam mounted stamps and clear stamps. It was just only rubber. So if people bought unmounted rubber, they mounted it themselves onto a piece of wood, usually, and they sold, you know, blank wood pieces and whatnot. Okay, so anyways, there we have it with the islands, and our little character is going to be down here fishing, and we can take a look at it right now. I should take a photo of this so I can show it kind of during the process of my video introductions. Let's see. Pardon me while I pause. Okay. I always forget to kind of do these periodic pauses for, I don't know, my video introductions, so I can put a piece like in, you know, in progress or whatever. People can see the stages of this. All right, your applicator. I don't know. Is there anything really more primitive and what better thing is available than a paper towel, you know, to apply your inks with, right? All right, this is antique linen here. Let's start applying. Okay, now I'm going to leave some of these areas fairly light in here, okay? So I'm going for a little bit of variation. So I have other videos on that, but just kind of doing, oops, I'm streaking in some of that black. It came off of this when I went like that. That tree right there is still really wet, okay? That's not going to matter too much, but I still don't want to get all this area completely dark down there, so I'm going to be a little bit careful about that. Maybe I'll work on the rest of this first, okay? So anyways, variation, okay? So you can put some inks down, like this, okay? Still dragging some of that black down there. Okay, but can you see this right here in the video? I don't know if it shows because there's not a lot of contrast up here, but some of these areas I just streaked up here and I'm leaving as is, you know, for that, you know, that variation in what'll be lighting, kind of getting established here. Okay, let's do the same thing down here in this water. I like to have some of my water reflecting some of that light. Now, in some of my recent scenes, I've kind of made my water all dark. And that's when there's a horizon and you can see quite a bit of the, the gradations in kind of twilight colors. And I really like this ocean, the Seaside Cove, really quite dark. But in this case, I have this figure that's going to be stamped down here. So I need this figure to be a little bit more spotlit. So I'm not going to just darken this out down here. If I darken this area out, it would be kind of to bring emphasis to other areas like the sky, for example. But in this scene, we're going to have a subject matter in the water, so I don't want to kind of have it so dark in there where when I stamp that figure out, it's just going to be completely, it's going to completely obscure the character where you barely see them. Okay, I want them to be, kind of the focal point of the scene or the subject matter. The sunset or whatever could play kind of equal, an equal role, but, I do want that figure to have, a degree of prominence within the, kind of the visual landing spot of your scene. What I mean by that is, something that, something that's not going to be so obscure that, it's going to not be apparent to someone without, a lot of really careful inspection. Okay, so this is that. So here's what we have here. We have sky, water, and land down here, okay? There's basically three areas. What you do, this is a simple thing with lighting, okay? There's coloring and then there's lighting. A lot of coloring is where people, I mean, coloring could be with lighting too, but a lot of times when people think about coloring, they color everything equally, okay, across the whole thing. A lot of times they don't like any kind of streaks in or something like that. In scenic stamping, lighting can play a big role in your scene. So what you do is you just leave some areas light in the different areas, In this case, it's like background, midground, and foreground, okay? But it could just be certain areas. There could be a big rock or something like that. And it just means just don't color the whole thing out. Leave some areas light. And there's nothing really simpler than that. A lot of people who find that really hard is because they just really feel the need to fill everything in. But kind of doing less coloring, I don't know. It is certainly less work, and it doesn't have to be this gigantic concept. You don't have to have kind of everything worked out in your head either. You just leave some areas light. If this area was over here and that was light and this was dark, it's not like, oh my god, I messed up. You just leave some areas light. You oscillate things. Think about it like checkerboard. Yeah, think about it like a checkerboard. Checkerboarding your colors, okay? So we go dark, light, dark, light, dark. Something like that. Okay? It gets, I don't know, if you're just, kind of getting into scenic stamping or doing some depictions of light, you kind of think about it a little bit, or a lot, with your first few scenes that you do. And it just gets to be something that you just kind of do naturally. You just kind of start to leave, a little bit of area light. You look for shadows, and it just gets to be a habit, and fairly quickly. But sometimes it's easier for me in the past, like where I've taught people that haven't stamped at all before, because sometimes habits kind of get kind of deeply ingrained, where it's like, it's usually like right now when they just fill in all of their light, they get rid of it, okay? Because they're just, you get real comfortable with the color application, but what happens is the lighting retention, sometimes gets a little bit lost. Which, isn't a problem. You just make other areas a little bit darker. Where you've made it too dark, make the other area around it darker, and that area that you thought you made too dark is suddenly what? It's lighter by, contrast. Okay, let's see here. This is antique, no, this is a walnut stain, sorry, switch to that. Oh yeah, I didn't go to my, my lighter tones. This is going to be darker than some of the colors that I'm using, so it just comes to show you, I mean, when you kind of line them up going from light to dark, I mean, it doesn't mean you can't jump around, you can't go into a darker color and, oh my god, I went to that darker color, I can't go back to the lighter one. You can. It'll change the spirit of the piece for sure. But, you just kind of layer it in. It's one of the beauties of, these dye-based inks and transparent colors. Transparent colors are also things like alcohol inks. Okay, so that is walnut stain. You see how those rocks are starting to kind of blend in? We have the retention of light and dark in all different sections here. Okay, I think this is a place that I think my dad would have enjoyed fishing. He'd go fishing anywhere, though. He wasn't too much. I mean, we did freshwater fishing as kids, but yeah, he seemed to be much more of an ocean type of guy. He wasn't like kind of drawn to go out like bass fishing or bluegill at the lake. And plus, there was only like one really close lake to us. I don't know, half an hour away or something like that in either direction, but and not as varied, I guess, in terms of locating, than saltwater. So he'd often go boat, you know, he liked going out on a boat with his friends, fishing. Sometimes party boats, you know, those chartered boats. And after he retired, a little bit of fishing like in Baja, you know, Cabo San Lucas and whatnot. I didn't really go out too much. I used to go fishing as kids up in the Sierras every summertime. And then we always used to go to doing what we call surf fishing. We always dug for these. We call them sand crabs. I don't know. I think they've been referred to as sand dabs or something like that. We call them sand crabs. You dig for sand crabs and use those as bait, and there was nothing better than that. A lot of times we'd come back with our limit on those. Barred perch. It was always the same fish. Perch. I think one time my dad might have reeled in a halibut or something like that. But that was like one time in our entire life. But he'd go and catch that type of thing off the boats all the time. Okay, you can see where this is really kind of warming up the scene, right? This is brilliant yellow. It's kind of an orangish yellow. Standard yellow would be good too, you know. There isn't something to... I don't have this kind of formula. I'm just grabbing whatever I have, alright? If I had some Memento ones in this color, I'd use that. Just, you know, for variation. Because not everyone has the same inks and whatnot. Certain inks, it is true, certain inks are going to be much brighter than other inks. You know, within a range, and even within a line of inks, you know, from the same company, okay? Marvy, if I was to characterize Marvy inks just in general, they tend to be very bright inks. They're pretty intense. You can see it right here, you know. Some inks are a little bit more earthy and mellow, okay? I'd kind of call the Distress inks, you know, something like that. And that's what I like about them. They're kind of aged and mellow. And I like the Marvys because they're super bright. The Mementos are kind of in between, I'd say. But the Mementos don't have that aged aspect to them. Maybe some of the colors do, but that's what the Distress inks are all about. So I personally like using, you know, the different brands for, you know, kind of their strengths. I don't want everything like super bright on my scenes. It just, sometimes it comes out too hot looking. Okay, I like it kind of a, you know, a transition of tones and intensities and sometimes temperatures. This one's going to be all warm pretty much. Okay, this is that brown that was used. Okay, see this right here? I'm kind of retaining my lighter areas in here. Okay. This is where it's really easy to lose all of your light, so kind of be careful about that. Kind of make shorter strokes, you know, maybe with your, you know, your lighter colors, you're making longer strokes. When you're working with your darker tones, you know, kind of, you know, adjust, you know, your application kind of methodology, okay? Maybe go for a little bit shorter strokes so you're not dragging in darker tones into those lighter areas like that, okay? When I'm using a little thing like this, it almost feels like, I don't know, who's done this, though, you know? You'd have to be a certain age where you might remember doing, you know, like shining, you know, shoes or shoe polish, you know, or whatnot, but that's what this kind of feels like, okay? I would say the mindset, though, is try to think of this as, oh, I don't know, like you're applying like a dry medium. I always say like you're applying like makeup on a child's face, okay? Especially if you're using like sponge applicators. You don't want to, you know, don't go in too hard like this, you know. It's too hard, you know. Just keep it kind of wispy like that. You see this. This is even on like copy paper. You know, you can get a nice transition like that. It looks like pastels or something like that, doesn't it? Okay. So what you're doing is you're a little bit heavier when you apply down, but then you're light as you do that stroke like that. See that right there? And see how I'm not doing this when I'm coloring. like along the side like this, okay? You're just staying in one area like this, and you're really getting that saturation down in one area, and then you move on to your next one like that, okay? And that's how you get this nice transitioning value scale from darker to lighter. Darker on the edge because there's more ink, you know, like that. Lighter in the middle because it kind of tapers off like that. Okay, see how that's kind of coming together? Alright, so that's the brown. This is really going to start coming together a lot more when I get into the dark brown and black, okay? Kind of finish your scenes with the same colors that you stamped your imagery in. In this case, it's black, right? And brown, you know, up there for the sky. Okay, so whenever you move into a much darker tone, just kind of be careful about it, you know. Take it in kind of at a slower rate, okay? You can kind of stay on the outside edge a lot longer. And what I like to do too, you don't re-ink this as often now because the paper is getting fairly wet, so that ink isn't transferring and soaking into the paper quite as fast. It is darker, so it's getting darker pretty fast, but that ink transfers a little bit slower. Yeah, see, I even took some of that brown into that little white right there, which I don't really like, but that's all right. That's one of the things about working with this wide paper towel like this. I can get a lot of what I get down, you know, with my stylus tools and sponge ones. But the sponge, you know, things like this, I can get into these areas a little bit, you know, easier. I've just been using kind of paper towels just because I know people have them. Stylus tools aren't available, you know, except in a couple places out there. They're still out there, but they're getting very, very scarce, okay? Okay. Alright, see, that's coming together. You know, we can really get that lighting going in there. Okay. See, if you want to get a little bit thicker application, sometimes you tap it like that and then blend it in a little bit. Okay. Try to anchor those islands down a little bit more by, creating more of a shadow for them. I should create, some more rocks around here or something like that. It says something for like a abalone kind of environment conducive for abalone. My dad always used to love going out for abalone. We used to go for like barred perch and things like that when I was really young. Then my dad discovered at the tide pools abalone hunting and whatnot. And I lived up in Lompoc. I grew up there, but my dad had base access because he worked out on base privileges, they call it. So there was a lot of coastline out there that was really quite pristine. Anytime we ever went to the beach, I hardly ever saw anyone out there. And you know, back in those days, probably not anymore, but you can get your limit on abalone, you know, and clams. We discovered clamming at one time out of this point out there. It's a really cool tide pool area. And we weren't really into crabbing or something like that, but abalone, clams, that became kind of more the thing that my dad was going for out on the when he went out there. Never any surf pit fishing at one point in time. I don't know. I just got tired of doing that. Plus, the perch weren't really very much of a sport fish. You know, you feel like you got it on the reel, and you just kind of reel it in. There's dragging up the beach, you know, or something like. He liked to go out, you know, something more, you know, that, I don't know, kind of put up a fight. Okay, let's see here. All right, moving into the black. Okay. Anyways, well, you know, what I'm getting at here is, you know, this is scenic stamping. You can alter these things, you know, in accordance with, you know, whatever types of things you want. I can create a abalone type of situation in here, you know, instead of going with these pines up here, you know, these spruce. I can go with kind of more just deciduous trees, you know, and have it, you know, like you know, create more rocks around here in the foreground and whatnot, you know, and it could be you know, northeast kind of Maine type of environment, you know, where you go out for a lobster or whatnot. You know, and it could be all based around this same type of thing. You can do the same color scheme. If I did, like, deciduous trees, I would do it in fall colors, probably. It's incredible out there in Maine. That is the one place that I just really kind of daydream about ever since I went out there. I think it was my second trip out there to Penn Ventures and some of the other stores in that in the state, and I treated myself. I went out there one weekend and stayed there for the entire week. Taught classes one weekend, and then there was, I think it was called the Jubilee or something like that there, the Maine's version of their convention. And there were some manufacturers out there too, but or a couple. But most of them were the stores. The stores would be the vendors at that show. And anyway, in between, I went to Acadia and I spent about 4 days. 5? I don't know if it was Monday through. I think Monday I was just traveling down there. I don't know if I went into Acadia on Monday, but 4 or 5 days of just really just hiking around Acadia National Park and practically had the entire place to myself. But anyways, yeah, I mean, you can put deciduous trees out there and it would be kind of in the spirit of that, you know, state. It's kind of moving more into twilight, definitely. I don't know. It's kind of getting darker, and I don't know. I think it looks more dramatic, don't you? Kind of dark you go. You know, you have more kind of extremes of contrast working in here. When you go a little bit darker on the edges, the lighter areas seem lighter by contrast. Okay, so that's what I was mentioning earlier. Sometimes if you go a little bit too dark, oh my god, I lost all my white, you know, you can just make this area around here darker, and that'll make that area that you've colored in, you know, earlier, lighter by contrast. Okay, so anyway, this thing's, you know, it's come together pretty quickly. Oh, okay, so I was mentioning other types of coloring media. Let's see, am I done here with, yeah, I think I'm done with the coloring aspect, let's play around with some other tones in here, okay? Here's some browns, here's a pink right here. These are alcohol markers. You can use watercolor markers as well. Well, let's get a little tinge, you know. Pink looks really good with browns, you know, just in terms of a color scheme, but you can also layer it right over the top of it, too. Now, if you did something like that, I would do it in really light shades, you know, just, you know, to begin with, okay? So let's see if we can get, you know, the gist of some of these colors showing on this existing color scheme that we've just worked out here, okay? All right, let's see what we have here. These are Marvy LaPlume permanents. So all kinds of different pens out there. See this in the, let me show you the mounted version of this stamp. Yeah, I use the unmounted version. Just, I don't know, to show you the application of, you know, the brayer. But see where there's darker areas underneath the cresting, you know, spindrift coming off the wave. In those areas that are darker, what I'm doing is I'm darkening them in with this pen right here, okay? Like that. So it's really kind of reiterating the shading, lighting convention of the design, okay? So see this area back here? And that's what these pens are really perfect for. You know, going for those highly detailed areas with, you know, or highly specific areas with, you know, a wad of paper towel. That's not really conducive for that, but these pens are, so, you know, you can kind of darken in your shadow areas like so. Okay, that was camel. I mean, you know, this isn't some kind of formalized thing. I just grabbed some pens that look like they were roughly, you know, the colors that I've used. Now this one's a little bit too dark. See this right here? It's much too bright. All right, and I don't like that. But if you're working on like a glossy photo paper or card stock, this coffee color, okay? Even after you've laid it down like that, see how kind of harsh those are? Okay, this one's brownish gray. See, you can just go in here, and then you spread that around and blend it out. You know, I mean, a lot of you are familiar with, you know, alcohol pens, Copics, or whatever brand. You know, you're familiar with blending them, so they have, you know, blending brush, you know, blending pen that you can do this with. But you can do it with any kind of thing. I usually just like to use a color out of my color scheme that's a little bit lighter as my blending pen. I don't usually use my blender pen too often. Blender pens, if you don't know, are just this pen that has just the clear binder liquid in the pen with no pigment or hue. So it's just fluid, and you know, when you kind of go over the top of alcohol kind of redissolves and goes back into solution, and you can spread those colors out. A little bit less so if you're doing it on like some papers that are very absorbent, where the ink's really kind of absorbed in the paper, then you can't really blend it out, you know, as easily. I wouldn't say at all, but just not as easy. Okay, so we're talking about some pink. This is a soft pink right here, so I'm not going with anything real harsh. Now this is almost acting like a blending pen too, because it's a much lighter version than that coffee, but see, I'm kind of getting a little bit of a pinkish tinge in with that, those other colors, okay? Anyways, things like this, it just gives a little bit more layered richness into the piece. This one's a pretty bright pink. This one's fuchsia. I've used it recently on like a spring blossom type of scenario. I don't know, you can bring it down here, kind of add it in these little rock pebble areas. Oh, you know what? Here's a perfect opportunity for these pens too. Let's go with this brownish gray. Do you see these rocks down here? See, I can kind of add a little bit of shadow to some of these like this with these pens. I won't do it over every single one because it's like hundreds. But if you add this little shadow at the base of some of these rocks, it's one of those little subtle little details that can really pay dividends. Kind of in the end result, it's one of those very subtle little things that just kind of add up, you know, cumulatively to the overall kind of resolution. All right, so let me see if you can see some of those shadows. Yeah, see. Right at the base of some of these. Now this pen is not really very dark at all, but you can see it like right there. And, you know, holding it up at arm's distance, it really doesn't, I don't know, read very much of it all, you know. But then when you get a little bit closer to it, I just think it looks a little bit more, you know, deep and rich and whatnot. Okay, so let's see. Let's take, oh boy, I was kind of wondering when I should stamp that, our character in there. And also I'm kind of wondering if I want to go with a little bit of a, kind of a crepuscular ray flare in here. And that's using white pigment ink and some paper. I don't know, I kind of like it like that. I might leave it. Yeah, okay. I don't know. I'll figure it out. Okay, so we have our little character like this. Maybe I should have stamped him before I stamped all that alcohol ink. I'm not sure if this is going to stamp really well on there. I might have to go with the Versafine for this character. Versafine's an oil-based pigment ink. Super high detail abilities. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to have this, I don't think I'm just going to stamp this right on down there like that. I'm going to mask off one of these waves like the character is behind the wave. Okay? And it's not supposed to be a big wave or anything like that. It's a little slapping on kind of a, you know, the character's legs or whatnot, but let's go about right up here. Okay, again, this is a Versafine black. Alright, light even pressure. Don't press too hard because I don't want that fishing, you know, the rod to be like this gigantic thing where it's like a paddle, you know, or something like that, where it's been squashed. So just keep most of the pressure like right around the figure. See over here and not on the, you know, the pole. Okay, so there he is. He's kind of obscured. I should have stamped him up in the lighter area. So much for that. Okay, so we got our figure there. Let's add. Now this figure does have, you know, it's the shadow down here, but that's more like if he's standing in like still water. Would you see that kind of reflection like that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little bit of shadow using this pen right here. Around the figure like that, okay? Yeah, okay. And what we'll do is we'll emphasize the figure a little bit more too. I'm thinking about some leaves. Yes, here we go. I might go kind of bold with, you know, some trees out here too. I'm kind of leaning towards that. Hold on, let me see here. I think I know the stamp to do that with. Let's see, I don't have it right here on my desk. Okay, we have our spruce, large. It's the larger version of those background ones, and pines and rocks. We'll see about this. I think that there's enough space in the scene where I think going with something bold like this, really bold in the foreground, will... I think the scene is, I don't know, solid enough to where I can have such large, bold things in the foreground without dominating the space. We'll see how this goes. Okay, now, like I said, I'm stamping over, all that alcohol ink. Alcohol ink tends to seal off the paper, kind of. So, pigment ink sits on the surface, okay? So if I tried to stamp this out into dye-based ink over the top of all that alcohol ink, I don't think it would the image wouldn't transfer or stamp out very dark and bold, where the pigment ink has no problem because it's surface-oriented. Dye-based inks work by staining, okay? Pigment ink sits on the surface, so it doesn't need to penetrate anything for it to show up, okay? Alright. Go over here, I gotta make sure that I'm not stamping over my figure. Okay. I'll go lower with this one. Again, kind of varying the height. Just like I did in the background with the smaller version. Okay, see this right here too. I feel that these images like this are bringing more emphasis to that little figure right there. I think it stands out more. So by contrast, I mean that is black and these ones are black too, but just having kind of this larger black field makes this area in here seem lighter by contrast, okay? And I'll go for 5 in the foreground here. They see that odd kind of numbered groupings, kind of more visually kind of appealing than even in compositions. Alright, so we have our foreground. The foreground right here used to be down there, but now it's very obscured. Obscured by these trees, which are largely covering up that area, but that's kind of the process of the, the whole thing. You just kind of, you can layer things. We layer colors, we layer images against one another. Very little masking. That's the way imagery kind of objects work out in kind of nature, right? Things are layered. There's layer upon layer of texture. All right. Okay. I'm going to put some birds in here to keep my character company. This would be a good place for a quote up here, but it's just too dark and too busy. I won't be able to see it unless I, cut it, stamp it on something else and put it right on top there. Actually, if this was a card too, I'd probably, put the quote either on the front of the card and you'd open it up into the scene, or this would be at the front of the card and you'd open it up and, there'd be a quote in there probably. Okay, so some final touches here. This is a tone right here. This is a Marvy paint pen. Okay, it's real similar to the color scheme, right? This is a peach color. It's kind of tan, right? And this will be a way to go back and add light into dark, all right? All other tones, like dye-based inks and alcohol inks, they're transparent colors, so if you put a light color over the top of a darker color, unless it's alcohol inks kind of dissolving some kind of darker ink and making it look lighter, you're just going to keep getting darker and darker and darker. Okay, but these types of pens like this are really fun because you can introduce lighter tones, textures, or shapes or whatever into dark. Okay, so it's a significant ability to be able to do. Okay. I need an access point in here where I'm not going to put my hand in that wet, super wet pigment ink. Ink takes a little bit of time to dry, but I'll just try to be careful about that. Okay, so going back in and adding some of these little highlights into the scene. These are like crashing waves, and right at the top they call it the spindrift. It's that kind of that mist that's coming off the top of a wave. I put a few little of those as highlights like that. It creates this nice shimmer and kind of just excuse for, some lighting, some additional lighting in the scene. I can put it on my water's surface and it would represent specular light. Okay, it's like reflected light coming off of something. As they call it in photography, specular light is light that's brighter than white. Okay, so you can see that kind of, isn't that kind of bringing that area, to life a little bit more? It's texture, it's lighting, it's something, very sharp and crisp. And these little dots like that. It's like magical little textures like that when you bring light into something. It's like, having something of a certain color, but having light into it, like Christmas lights or something. I wouldn't think about it like Christmas lights, don't apply it in that spirit, but, it's bringing that kind of twinkle into an otherwise, kind of fairly monochrome. Well, I wouldn't call it monochrome in there, but this definitely does add, that nice dimension, textural dimension into the piece. Okay. I kind of put a little bit more in the lighter areas, then I kind of taper it off, and in terms of, I space out the dots more as it moves into the darkness. So more in the light like this, and then spread it out as it moves out into the darkness, okay? So condensed, and then spread out. Okay, something like that. See a little bit more, and look how spread out those dots are out there. I don't know, you put little highlights like that, it doesn't look like it's kind of a more spectacular, really inviting place for that fisherman as well. Okay. There used to be this one area, the beach, Air Force Base that we'd go, and we found it just had the best fishing, surf fishing, but it required this, I don't know what it was. It seemed like 3/4 of a mile from the car down to the beach, down this long kind of dirt hill. I think we called it the hill. And pretty soon, we were only going to that place because it had the best, we would get our limit there every time, but I'd be playing. I'd fish a little bit, but I'd get tired of that, and I'd just go play in the sand dunes all the time. And whatnot. When I was really little, sometimes I'd get so tired I would really... And then you're walking up this hill, up this trail, and a lot of it was sandy, so you're walking in kind of deep sand. I get so tired, my dad would have to carry me sometime. In the meantime, he's carrying like, I don't know, 15, 20, probably, I don't know, maybe more, 20, 25 pounds of fish, up through sand. So anyway, thanks, Dad, for the piggyback ride. Alright, so adding some of these little highlights to these trees right here. It's kind of center lit in here, so to the sides of the tree that are facing the light, I'm putting a few little highlights on it. On the sides of the trees, that are facing, that light. Let me show you right here. See these trees right there? See those little highlights on there? And doesn't that kind of make, I don't know, doesn't it illuminate those trees a little bit more? And the scene in general, it's just visually more interesting. Look at that. There's there 1, 2, I don't know, like 10 little tiny dots on the side of that tree. This is what it looks like at arm's distance, right? But you start moving closer and closer, and look how those little dots really bring out that tree out from the background. Okay? And on here, you can see there's just more highlights around the trees that are closer to the light source. Okay? Alright. See if I don't know if this character in here is catching fish or not, but if you ask them, they probably wouldn't care. They'd rather catch fish, but, even if they got skunked, it was a good day out in the water, or at the beach, or whatever, at the lake, wherever this is. I'm tempted to put a few stars up here, but I think I'm going to leave it like that. I don't want it to be kind of this too twilight, dusk dawn before light type of, scenario. Okay. Now, let me see if I have some opportunities in here for some white pigment ink. Okay, now this is just a used cotton ball. And I cannot apply this over the top of this Versafine at this point in time. Versafine is just way too wet still. So what I'll do is I'll apply it to some of these dye-based impression areas, and maybe it'll create a little bit more kind of a textural range and reinforce the lighting, okay? So we have the lighting in here, and just ever so slightly dabbing, very lightly, a very dry version of this pigment ink over the top. I'm going for 10 tappings, and you can barely see anything, but you see where that's starting to look a little bit lighter. See, doesn't that look a little bit like those trees are kind of illuminated back there? They might look a little even farther back in the distance by, putting a little bit of this pigment ink on them. Okay? Now, here in the water, maybe I can add a little bit of this lighting in here as well. It's kind of putting some light and illumination on the water. Soft illumination. Okay? And, where these crisp little highlights are down here, it's kind of a crisp illumination. So, kind of using both textural kind of polar extremes is a fun way to describe and to kind of animate an area, kind of bring it alive a little bit. Very soft, diffused against the very sharp and defined, right? So what do we have? What are we talking about? We're talking about range. Okay. Now I wish I can go over some of these trees right here, but like I said, they're just too wet right now, so I'm not going to do that. Putting some of this down here in this water area. Anyways, so we have a little bit of this kind of soft illumination happening now. This is going to dry darker than how it looks when it's been freshly applied to, so it'll kind of mellow in there. And then when I spray this, you don't see, quite as much of this real thin application either, so I'm putting a little bit more down than, I normally would, in terms of how it looks, okay? I go a little bit overboard so that when I do spray it and when it dries, it'll be about, the application that I want on here. Okay, so anyways, yeah, just a fun little, just a, I don't know, Father's Day type of thing I wanted to stamp out. I don't know what else to say. Yeah. Thanks for the hikes, Dad. Thanks for the fishing. My dad always would take me to the beach or on hikes really whenever I wanted. I think sometimes, like during the summertime when it would get much darker later, I think he would even take me out sometimes after work. He'd drive home and we'd go out there. I seem to recall that. But a lot of fun times, a lot of good memories. Okay, so anyways, background, I don't know, midground, foreground, and kind of much closer foreground like that. So that figure, how it's standing out, that figure was kind of obscured quite a bit, when I first stamped him in there. But I think it's these darker trees. You put these darker trees right next to it like that, and it makes this whole area seem lighter by contrast. Remember down here was really light, with that shoreline. But just kind of stamping this right over the top of it. Now we just have this little peekaboo area of it. But I could really, that little figure stands out now much more distinctly than before, just because this was so light down here. I mean, this area right here is really light next to it too, but I don't know, this framing kind of helped the composition in general as well. So you do things like this, larger versions of things somewhere in the scene, and if you do smaller versions in the background, it brings continuity via shape relationships as well. So you have smaller versions and larger versions like that. It creates this whole repetition of imagery, and that brings kind of visual continuity into the piece. So anyways, dye-based ink versions and the darker pigment ink versions create a nice value dynamic. As dark as that black is from Marvy, it just is never going to be as dark as a pigment ink sitting on the surface style of ink like that. So, but then you play them off one another like that, and if that one is supposed to represent something farther away, then it's appropriate that it's a little bit lighter than their counterparts up very close. Okay, anyways, hope you liked the scene. If you have any questions, drop me a note in the comment section. And to all the fathers, or the memories of the fathers out there, I wish you a happy Father's Day 2020. Gotta be careful touching that tree.